Now, Tottenham Hotspur travel to the G-Tech Community Stadium on Thursday, the 1st of January 2026. Thomas Frank, of course, returns to his old club, Brentford. Now, Brentford are currently 8th in the Premier League table under new boss Keith Andrews, and Thomas Frank's Tottenham are up to 11th after a 1-0 win at Crystal Palace on the 28th of December, with Archie Gray scoring his first goal for the club. Now, Gareth, of course, these teams met on the 6th of December. The result, 2-0 Spurs at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. I remember saying after the game, I felt like the only disappointing thing from a Tottenham fan perspective was the fact that we only scored 2 goals, because we showed real attacking intent. Keith Andrews was very disappointed. He said in the press conference after the game that his team were not at the levels that he expects or what the players expect of themselves. Firstly, what did you make of that game at the Tottenham Stadium 3 weeks ago? And I think it's very fair to say this is going to be a very, very different game.
Excuse me. I was going to say exactly what you said there, Chris. It was probably the most impressive league home victory of the season against Brentford. I thought it was very one-sided. And Keith Andrews alluded to that in his post-match press conference on the 6th of December, that Brentford were way off it and Spurs were a lot better. As you said, it probably should have been more than the 2-0 victory that Spurs had. But I think it's been widely known this year that Brentford have been much, much stronger and much more competitive at home. But as we've seen with Spurs, as the top of the league, top of the away form table in the Premier League, so Spurs, you could also argue, have been better away from home. So it makes for an intriguing game. But I do expect a much better version of Brentford than what we seen 3 weeks ago. I think that 4-1 win against Bournemouth too, they'll be really, really confident going into this game at home. And Keith Andrews has done a brilliant job. So I expect a very, very, very hard game against this Brentford outfit. And it'll be interesting, the atmosphere and the reception that Thomas Frank gets going back there. Of course, you would expect it to be good. But there's no friends in football, Chris. They will be, looking to get one over on Thomas Frank. And, Brentford are above Tottenham in the table. So there'll be some Brentford fans looking at that going, well, you could have stayed here, and possibly the way the league's gone this year, maybe we could have been pushing for a European spot. So I can't say enough good about what Keith Andrews has done. The players they've lost, losing Thomas Frank, I think they've done a remarkable job, because I have to admit, I think when you asked me at the start of the season, my bottom 3, I had Brentford in it, just because of the players they've lost and Keith Andrews. So fantastic what he's done there.
Gareth, what do you make of Tottenham's 1-0 victory at Crystal Palace on the 28th of December, last time out? Because that now puts Tottenham top of the league table in terms of away wins this season. Of course, we've spoken many, many times this season about our home form, particularly during the year of 2025. But Spurs seem to find a way to win away. Although when you look at our record in the Premier League this season, and we're nearly at the halfway point of this Premier League campaign, played 18, we have won 7, we have drawn 4, we have lost 7. We've scored 27, we've conceded 23, we have a goal difference of +4, we have 25 points, and somehow we are only 4 points away from 5th. We are 4 points away from top European spots. So this form, it has to continue in terms of winning, grinding out results. No matter how you're going to win games, winning needs to continue under Thomas Frank. But when you look online, when you talk to many Spurs fans face to face, however you talk to them, a lot of people seem to be very unhappy with the style of play. Again, even though we won at Palace.
Look, I've been very critical of the manager in recent weeks. So I'm going to start with a positive, Chris. We got 3 points against Crystal Palace.
Yeah.
And that is a positive. Whatever you want to say about the manager, whatever you want to say about the players, Crystal Palace is not an easy place to go. Yes, you could argue we probably had them at the right time. There's not many teams go to Crystal Palace and won. And there hasn't been since Oliver Glasner's been in charge. And although Palace were probably the team that asked more questions, they created 1 or 2 opportunities. But if you look at the chances that Spurs created towards the end of the game, I think we had the more clear-cut opportunities, and I thought we were quite resolute, especially in those last sort of final 20 minutes when you expected Palace to really throw everything at Spurs. I thought we coped with it quite well. But, should we get carried away? Should we be, leaping praise on the players and the manager? Definitely not, because, it's just one game. We need to see these points and these results becoming more frequent. And, whilst winning the game, it's not, we didn't play overly good, but we did enough on the day to win. And look, if you had asked me before the game kicked off, would you rather a strong performance or a good result? And because of where we are right now at the moment, I thought a result was imperative. Over the next number of weeks now, if we can get on a run, I'd like to see performances becoming a bit more consistent and, something to get behind. But I just think over this Christmas period, it was really important for the manager and the club. They really steady the ship and get some points on the board, because it was 1-1-8 going into that Crystal Palace game. I don't think any Spurs fans really were confident going into the game that we could win. And now all of a sudden, and I don't want to get carried away, and I'm sure Spurs fans don't want to get carried away, but if you look at the January fixtures in the Premier League, on paper, they're quite favourable. So I think if Thomas Frank's going to put a run together, it's going to be this month, before that Man City game I think it's the 1st of February. So this is an opportunity now for Spurs to find some consistency and get some points on the board, because yes, we haven't been great, and we've been poor for the majority of the season. But as I said, Chris, there's been a lot of teams that are inconsistent. Have Liverpool been any better than Spurs, for example? I've watched a lot of their games, and they're scripting results. They've just been able to get a few more results than Spurs. So I think there's a lot of teams at the top end. If you look from sort of 10th to 4th or 5th, outside of those top 3 teams, they've all been very inconsistent. So,
yeah,
if Spurs were to pick up, 12 points out of their next 15, then they would probably find themselves up around that top 4, top 5 spots. So it's really important now that we can find some consistency in results, and then we can start to maybe put some layers to these performances that Thomas Frank keeps mentioning. But credit to the manager and the players. It was a big one at Crystal Palace.
Absolutely. Yeah, well said. We have been here a couple of times this season, though, Gareth, haven't we, where we feel like we've turned a little bit of a corner. When the fans, including myself, was crying out for entertaining football. And then, of course, we, played extremely well against Copenhagen. Many people said, well, it was against weak opposition. And then, of course, we had that good week, that 2-2 draw away at Newcastle, a very good point, not particularly a very good performance, but a very good point in terms of places to go, difficult places to go. And then we had that really good performance at home against Brentford, beating them 2-0. And like I said earlier, we should have scored more, followed by that 3-0 win against Slavia Prague in the Champions League. So that was a really good week in terms of 2 entertaining performances, 2 clean sheets, 5 goals scored, 2 home wins. It was a really good week. And then, of course, we then went away to Nottingham Forest and lost in the manner and the fashion that we did. How confident are you that Thomas Frank can turn this Spurs squad and team into a team that can be consistent? And I know that we talk on these shows about all of the other Premier League clubs as well, and there are a lot of inconsistent teams in the Premier League right now. When you look at some of the records and you look at that whole host of clubs mid-table, that a point or two is separating a lot of clubs, but it gives Spurs a real chance, doesn't it? This first half, Thomas Frank has called it a transitional period. A lot of pundits, a lot of ex-players have come out and said, look, we're in a transition period. Jamie Redknapp has recently come out and said, look, Thomas Frank needs time. He needs patience from the fans. And I believe that a lot of pundits have actually called out Spurs fans and said, look, you can't keep sacking managers. You can't keep going around in circles. I've said it myself since Pochettino went out the door in 2019 when he was sacked, including him, up to the end of 2025 now, we've had 6 permanent managers, 3 interim appointments, Ryan Mason twice and Stellini. But Spurs, we find ourselves in a position where we're only 4 points away from 5th. So it's now, in this second part of the season, if Spurs can somehow get a run of wins together, we will climb up that Premier League table. Fans will have smiles on their faces, and the January transfer window is just a couple of days away as well, which is huge for the football club. And we're hearing many reports, including from Football.London, that the wage structure at the club will change because Spurs want to try and attract, a better caliber of player, and perhaps players that we've missed out on in previous windows because of the transfer structure that has been at the football club. But this is an opportunity now, Gareth, isn't it? That we only want to go up.
Yeah, look, you made some really good points there, Chris. So I'll try and get through. Them there. But I'll start with the pundit side of it. I always find it really uncomfortable when pundits are telling fans how they should feel, or managers, they don't watch all the games. They don't watch every game. Every minute. And if you look at the Premier League table, they go.
I would never tell anyone how to feel, but I completely agree. When you are a pundit and you are not a fan of that club and you are not watching every game week in, week out, I completely agree with you.
Yeah, and if you look at the Premier League table, then you go, well, they're 11th in the table. They were 17th last year. They're only 4 points off the top. It doesn't look that bad. Thomas Frank keeps saying that this is not a short-term fix. This is going to take time, and it's almost like everyone's trying to paint this picture that it's not that bad at the moment. Everything's going kind of okay, and yes, we can be better, but that we are where we should be. And look, we've seen enough games this season, and as you rightly pointed out, we've had the Copenhagen, we've had Slavia Prague, we've had Brentford. They've all been false dawns and false starts. So I can't remember the last time in the league we won back-to-back games. It's probably the start of the season against Burnley and against Man City, which is a long time for a top club to be able to go that far without winning 2 games. And let's be honest, I wanted to start with a positive because I've been Mr. Negative on here for so long. So I wanted to give the manager credit and the players credit for that one at Palace, but it wasn't a pretty watch, Chris. It was a dogged. And the players deserve character. They showed some character and mentality, and they deserve credit for that. But it was not a pretty watch, and you can't expect to play like that every week and get results. The performance levels will have to improve to get ones on a more regular basis. Oh, sorry, you're on mute, Chris. It's usually you saying that.
I'm not defending the way that we won that game, but sometimes in Premier League games you need to really dig deep and grind a result out. And Kevin Danso's performance. You mentioned about positives. I think there were a lot of positives from that Crystal Palace game. There was a lot of negativity online because I think it's stemmed from other games this season which have been boring. But I also said this on the Spurs Chat podcast after the Crystal Palace 1-0 win, that a couple of wins, a couple of positive performances, and 1 or 2 really good transfers early in the January transfer window, it will get everyone
back
up
on
for it again.
It will get people back on side. And look, I think this is another big game for the club. Not just Thomas Frank. I think if Brentford. I think everyone in the fan base would take a very similar performance in one just to get points on the board again. As much as we are critical of times of the manager, there's very few teams go to Crystal Palace and take them to the cleaners and beat them 3 or 4-0 and play great football. And very similar with Brentford. A lot of teams have went to Brentford. You think about, I think Man City are the only big team to go and won there this year. I think they won 1-0 and they scored in the first few minutes and sort of dug in the second half. So this could be Pochettino Spurs, and I wouldn't be expecting us to go to Brentford and win 3 or 4-0 playing swashbuckling football. So there does have to be an understanding that you can't win every game playing the so-called Tottenham way. But I think what really helps is results, and the results haven't been there. So the football's become under more scrutiny. So I think if you go and get a 1 here, depending on what happens on Tuesday night and the rest of the fixtures on Thursday, the table could look very different for Spurs on Thursday night, as they were it was on Christmas Day. So, look, there's no secret, and I think it's great that we're hearing the intentions, and it's not just off any reporter; it's off very trusted reporters that there is a willingness to change the way the transfers are being done. Yeah. And my one worry in January is, it's okay, we'll only pay the top wages, but you still have to attract that player. Where are we in the food chain at the minute? If all our clubs go on for the same player, how much of a willingness is going to be there to join Spurs. But the only thing that can improve that is performances on the pitch. And I still think there is question marks over the manager. I'm not there. Yes, I'm going to give him praise for the one. But I need to see more before I can commit to thinking he's going to be a good Tottenham manager. And look, the only way to do that's win games. And I am very happy. I'm not one of those fans at the moment. Yes, I've been critical of the style of play. But if Spurs won every game in January playing dogged football, and then they get a couple of players in and a couple of players back from injury, and then we start to see more of a style of play, then I'm happy enough. But when a manager's under pressure, you have to find ways to win games. He's done that against Crystal Palace, and he needs to find that now over the next few weeks because, Chris, as we says, the fixtures are very favourable on paper over the next sort of 4 weeks, and we need to pick up points because they're going to get more difficult as February hits them.
When that final whistle went at Selhurst Park and Spurs won that game 1-0, Thomas Frank looked absolutely delighted. He went around every Spurs player, shaking their hand and hugging them, and he looked relieved, in my opinion. Do check out the videos on YouTube.
I have to say as well, the away support in that Crystal Palace game was absolutely fantastic. I'm actually emotional speaking about it here because a Spurs team that's under so much pressure, and one, it's just after Christmas. The weather was awful during the game because I've seen it on the TV, and the support, the singing, the back in the play. I hope every player and every part of that management team understands how lucky they are to have such a loyal support. Yes, there has been criticism, but when that whistle goes, you can be sure they are behind the team and behind the club. And I thought it was a great moment. At the end of the game when Thomas Frank looked so happy because there's no secret that he's been under pressure, Chris. And look, I've been critical of him. Our guests have been critical of him, but we're all in the same boat. We would all love to see Thomas Frank succeed, and you've said that numerous times. We want this to work. So, look, if we keep winning games, then Thomas Frank will get that. He'll get much more of a backing from the fans. But at the moment, it's just results are probably more important than performances just to get through this period. So let's hope it continues in the next few games.
Now, previous meetings, Spurs have won 6 out of the 10 meetings. Brentford have only won 1, and the remaining 3 finished as a draw. As I mentioned, on the 6th of December, Spurs beat Brentford 2-0. Last season, we beat Brentford 3-1 at home, and we beat them 2-0 away. Now, Brentford have failed to win any of their 4 Premier League home games against Tottenham, with 3 consecutive draws being followed by a 2-0 defeat last season. Tottenham have won their last 4 Premier League matches against Brentford, and they've only lost 1 in 9 overall, winning 5, drawing 3, and that was a 3-1 defeat back in May 2023. Having won their first league game in 5 consecutive calendar years between 2020 and 2024, Brentford lost 3-1 at home to Arsenal on New Year's Day 2025, and Tottenham have lost their first 5 league games in 2 of the last 3 calendar years, drawing 1, including a 2-1 home loss to Newcastle in 2025. They've not lost their opening league game in consecutive calendar years since 2008-2009. Gareth, who are going to be the key players for Brentford and Spurs in this game? And also, I want to get your opinion on Christian Eriksen's comments on Thomas Frank. Basically, and I'm going to paraphrase here, he did an interview with the Times and he said that, the defensive teams sometimes are the more successful ones and sometimes defensive teams win trophies. But he also then said, but, Tottenham fans, they need flair.
Yeah. The key players, I think Brentford have a terrific, another player emerging. That you think about the players they've lost, but I'm a big fan of Kevin Shada. I think he is really top player in the making. Yes, and it's not easy to say because he got the hat-trick against Bournemouth, but rapid, very good finisher, and he'll be a constant threat in this game. And again, not just because he's Irish, but I think a lot of clubs must a trick with Kevin Kelleher when he left Liverpool. Brentford picked him up for £18 million. I think he's a better goalkeeper than the one Tottenham have. I think he's a better goalkeeper than the one that Chelsea have.
Yep.
I think outside of you'll say about Donnarumma, brilliant penalty saver, but I think Kelleher has got different strengths to his game. But other than Allison, Donnarumma, David Raya, I think Kevin Kelleher's a top 4 Premier League goalkeeper. So I was shocked that he went for the money that he did. So I think when you have a goalkeeper like that, it can make a big difference. And we've seen that with Arsenal over recent weeks with David Raya. So Kelleher's one to watch with Brentford. I think come the summer, there may be a lot of teams queuing at the door for him, and Chiara being the other one. So I think there are 2 key players for Brentford. Tottenham, it'd be interesting to see what Thomas Frank does with Romero back. He's captain, back from suspension. Danzo had a great game, clean sheet. What does he do there? Does he give
Man of the match?
a break? Yeah, that's a big decision from the Mick. Does he potentially arrest one of the fullbacks and put Van de Ven at left back and play Danzo and Romero? Because Jed Spence and Pedro Porro played a lot of football recently. That's another interesting one. But other than that, Dragoson's back, but you wouldn't imagine he'll be playing 90 minutes anytime soon. So there's nobody coming back in the final third in terms of Madison, Kulusevski, Solanke, which is frustrating. Xabi Simons obviously suspended. So I think it'll be very similar in that area of the pitch. I'm going to give Richarlison some credit because I think he worked his socks off against Crystal Palace. I think he's unlucky with the first one, but I think the second goal is where a lot of frustration comes for. He should have been onside for the second goal that was disallowed. It'll be interesting to see what happens with Brennan Johnson over the next few weeks. He was at the darts last night with James Maddison, and he didn't look, he was laughing on the sideline in the first half. He didn't look like a player that's, unhappy that he's not playing at the moment. So it'll be interesting to see what happens again over the next number of weeks. But moving on to Christian Eriksen, first of all, I'm going to start by saying what a terrific player he was for Tottenham and for Denmark. I mean, brilliant player. Yeah. Arguably, think of that Pochettino era. Everyone's got their favourites: Kane, Son, Dele Alli. Eriksen was always my favourite. I think just an absolutely incredible player. Never injured. Always give 100%. And when Christian Eriksen played well, Tottenham Hotspur played well. He was that good. Maybe not in the same breath as a Kevin De Bruyne, but he was that type of player. When he was at his best, Spurs were at their very best. So, interesting comments about the Champions League final. Interesting comments about Thomas Frank. Look, I think, Chris, we spoke about this recently. When them players have these interviews, I would love to know what they really think when the lights go out on the camera, because they're always going to say, and I know Eriksen's not contracted to Tottenham, but he's a Danish native of Thomas Frank, so, and he played for Thomas Frank at Brentford. So again, I would be very surprised if he says anything negative about him. So I take those with a pinch of salt. But look, he's right in what he's saying about he probably thinks that maybe under Pochettino in some of them finals and semi-finals, maybe Spurs should have been a bit more pragmatic, because they always went on the front foot and maybe never got over the line, But look, I think every Spurs fan, during that period loved the way the team played. So look, it's great to see Christian Eriksen back to full health and full fitness, and the brain he's got in terms of football and how he played on the pitch. It'll be interesting to see if he dips his toe in the management, because players like that, you would imagine, should be very, very good in coaching our players. So, interesting in some capacity what he says about Frank, but as I say, you're probably asking the wrong person. I take everything that these players say with a pinch of salt in front of the camera.
Gareth, what do you think the return for Thomas Frank is going to be like going back to the G-Tech Community Stadium?
I think before the game, the game kicks off, I'm sure when Thomas Frank walks out, he'll get a fantastic reception. Why would he not? Brentford are doing well. They're not in any danger at the moment, so there shouldn't be any real bitterness there towards him. If they were sitting in the bottom three, there might be a sort of, you left us in a mess here. But I think the way Brentford are, and I think they've got a great relationship with this new manager and Keith Andrews, I think it'll be fairly positive. But I do think when the game kicks off, there will be a bit of an extra spice to it. I think the fans will be looking for a win, just to get one over on Thomas Frank. And Chris, we know Brentford away under the lights is always a difficult game. They've had some major scalps in the Premier League since they've arrived in the Premier League. Most of them coming with a night game at Brentford. So it's going to be a very difficult game. And any Spurs fan expecting the Brentford that played at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium on December the 6th was sorely mistaken. This will be a much tougher game.
Well, Brentford are currently eighth. They have 26 points from the opening 18 games. They have won 8, they have drawn 2, and they have lost 8. They have scored 28, and they have conceded 26, and they are only 3 points away from the top 5. Brentford are actually only 1 point above Spurs, 8th v 11th, as I mentioned. Gareth, finally, predicted lineup and score prediction. Javi Simmons has still got 2 games remaining of his ban after the red card against Liverpool. Christian Romero will return for Spurs. But as you mentioned there, Kevin Danso, man of the match performance against Crystal Palace. Does he keep his place? Does Romero come straight back in? What happens here?
I think the manager might do something a little bit different because we know Brentford are them long throws cause a lot of teams problems. And I think he'll want to have Danzo on there defending and possibly for his long throw as well, from an attacking point of view. I think he may rest Porro. I think he may play Spence at right back. He may play Van de Ven at left back, and he may play Danzo and Romero as a 2. Vicario will obviously keep his place in goal. I think Archie Gray, that goal, will probably keep him in the team. So I think Paulinho may come on for Bentancur just for a better rotation. And then the front 3, I think Kudos will play on the right. I think Odegaard deserves to start, Chris. I thought he had a brilliant impact in that game against Crystal Palace. And I think we're seeing some signs there. I think he lacks a little bit of physicality, but I think we're seeing signs there that there is a player there, possibly. How good he'll end up being, I'm not sure, but I do think there's something there. So I think Odegaard comes in. Interesting one what happens with Bergville. You know, if Bergville's out, then they've got a real problem in that number 10 position because Sarr's at the AFCON. Bergville possibly injured and Simmons suspended. So does he play with a front 2? Does he play with Miani and Richarlison as a front 2? I think there's a possibility we might go with 4-4-2, but with Van de Ven at left back. So I don't think the manager's got a lot of options based on injuries and suspensions at the moment, plus the AFCON.
Is this game going to be won by a set piece?
I think there's probably odds on that being the case. I don't think it's going to be high scoring. I think it's going to be a battle, and I do think a long throw or a corner probably wins it. I do think it'll be super tight and possibly similar to the Palace game, not being a great watch. But I think if Thomas Frank's smiling at the end of the game, I think those travelling away Spurs fans won't mind.
Gareth, I'm hoping obviously for 3 points. Grind out a result. Hopefully Thomas Frank can do the double over his old club and travel to the GTEC on New Year's Day, and we get off to a flying start in 2026 because, I'm personally hoping that this second part of the season is going to be a lot better. I know we've spoken a lot and the fan base has spoken a lot about those attacking players. I know Maddison is not expected back until right at the very end of the season. But Dominic Solanke and Kulusevski, let's hope that we see them back soon, and let's hope that Spurs can get an injection of real quality early on in this January window, because games are coming thick and fast, and that the second half of the season needs to be a lot better if Spurs want to have any chance of finishing in a European spot. My score prediction, I'm actually going to go for a 1-0 Tottenham win. I don't think it's going to be the most entertaining game again. I think it's going to be very similar to the Palace game. But we've got to take the positives from the Palace game. And, 3 points against Brentford would be very, very welcome right now.
Yeah, Chris, we'll shake hands. I'm going to go for 1-0 on Spurs as well. I think it's very similar. I'd be surprised if it was a goal fest, and surprised if we see loads of entertaining attacking football. So, look, as it says, not many teams go to Brentford and won in spectacular fashion either. So I think it's more so at home, Chris, where the fans expect that more, front foot attacking football as opposed to being away from. So this Crystal Palace away and Brentford away. If you come out of those games with 6 points, no one can really complain. So let's hope that is a positive start to 2026, and we get off to a great start. And we carry on from there. I don't want this to be an hour false start. I've said what I've said about Thomas Frank, and I want more, but I get no satisfaction coming on here and saying about the managers not being good enough, and I'd like a change, or I'd like to see different. I want to come on here and praise the manager and praise the team, because that is what gives me more satisfaction. So let's hope it's 3 points on New Year's Day, and let's hope results go for us and we're sitting in that top 10, and then we can start looking up at the teams above us, because there isn't that many points between us, Chris. And like I says, coming up, Sunderland coming up in the league, West Ham coming up in the league, and Burnley. They're winnable games, and if you can pick up near enough maximum points there, the table will look very different going into February, and who knows then what is possible. So, Chris, one thing that they say is, congratulations on making 200,000 subscribers. You worked so hard for it this year, and I'm delighted you got it before the end of the year. And this is our final Premier League predictions of 2025. So I want to thank everyone that's watched and contributed along the way, and be sure to join us again in 2026.
Thank you so much, Gareth. Thank you for that. And thank you so much for all of your input during this year. Just wanted to end by saying, what a fixture schedule Tottenham do have during January. We've got 8 games over 3 competitions: Premier League, FA Cup, and 2 in the Champions League. So starting with the 1st of January, Brentford away, and then Sunday the 4th of Jan, we have Sunderland at home. 3 days later, on Wednesday the 7th of Jan, Bournemouth away in the Premier League, and then 3 days later, at home against Aston Villa in the FA Cup 3rd round. A week later, we host West Ham United at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. On the 20th of Jan, Borussia Dortmund come to the Tottenham Stadium in the Champions League. 4 days later, away at Burnley in the Premier League, and then 4 days later, on the 28th of Jan, Frankfurt away in our final Champions League group stage game. So games really are coming thick and fast, and it is about the transfer window. It is about keeping players fit, and let's hope also it's about players returning to this Thomas Frank team and squad.